What if the smallest V8 engines ever built packed more history, innovation, and impact than the big blocks everyone talks about? From lightweight aluminum marvels to downsized warriors of the fuel crisis era, these compact power plants help shape muscle cars, sports cars, and daily drivers alike. In this hour-long episode, I count down the 40 smallest V8s ever put in production cars. Number 40. Ford 400 cubic inch, 6.6 liter, V8, 1971 to 1982. At first glance, the Ford 400 might not seem like a candidate for a list focused on the smallest V8 engines, but context matters. While its 400 cubic inches place it at the top of this countdown, the Ford 400 earns its spot for being the largest member of a new generation of downsized big blocks. Introduced in 1971 as part of Ford's 335-engine family, the 400 was built during a turning point in American automotive history, when emissions regulations, fuel economy concerns, and changing consumer demands began reshaping engine design philosophy. Unlike the massive 429s and 460s of the preceding era, the 400 was developed as a compromise between big block torque and small block compactness. It was the only member of the 335 series to feature a tall deck block, allowing for a longer stroke and thus greater displacement without drastically increasing the engine's external dimensions. That made it easier to fit in a range of full-size cars and light-duty trucks without sacrificing low-end grunt, which was vital in an era when performance was increasingly restrained. The 400 was first offered in the Ford Torino and Mercury Montego, and later found widespread use in vehicles like the Thunderbird, LTD, Ranchero, and even F-Series trucks. Rated at around 170-180 horsepower in its emissions-strangled form, it wasn't a powerhouse by muscle car standards. Its real strength was torque, delivering over 320 pound-feet in most versions, giving heavy cars and trucks respectable pulling power even as federal regulations steadily tightened the noose on engine performance. Over time, the 400 became better known as a stopgap, an attempt to keep the V8 tradition alive in a decade, increasingly defined by compromise. Though large in size, the 400 marks the beginning of a long journey downward, a journey toward leaner, smaller V8s that make up the rest of this list. Number 39. Chevrolet 400 cubic inch, 6.6 liter, V8, 1970 to 1980. The Chevrolet 400 small block V8 stands as a curious case in the evolution of American engine design, both large in displacement and yet small in ambition. Introduced in 1970, it was the largest small block V8 that General Motors ever produced, aimed not at drag strips or racetracks, but at the rising challenge of making full-size cars move efficiently in an era of increasing weight and decreasing performance. At its core, the 400 was a bored and stroked version of the proven small block architecture, sharing much of its DNA with the 350 but featuring a larger 4.125-inch bore and longer 3.75-inch stroke. This combination allowed it to produce abundant torque at low RPMs, which was increasingly valuable as gear ratios became taller and performance expectations more restrained. It was also the first small block to use Siamese cylinder bores, meaning no coolant passages between the cylinders, allowing for more displacement in the same physical space, but raising long-term cooling concerns. Unlike its smaller siblings, the 400 wasn't intended for high-revving horsepower. Instead, it was tuned for smooth, lazy torque, ideal for moving full-size Chevys like the Impala, Caprice, and station wagons, as well as light-duty trucks. In fact, it was rarely seen with performance-oriented components like high-compression heads or aggressive camshafts. GM even limited its use of the engine in high-performance cars, partly to avoid internal competition with their big block 402 and 454. Over time, the 400 developed a mixed reputation. On one hand, it delivered respectable performance in heavy vehicles without requiring a physically larger engine bay. On the other hand, its unique internal design made parts swapping trickier for hot rodders, and cooling issues became a known drawback. Still, the 400 remains a significant milestone, marking the upper limit of what a small block V8 could be, even as the industry began moving towards smaller, more efficient designs. Number 38. Ford 390 cubic inch, 6.4 liter, V8, 1961 to 1976. The Ford 390 V8 was a cornerstone of the FE, Ford Edsel, engine family, introduced in 1961 as a versatile mid-level power plant that would come to define Ford's full-size performance throughout the 1960s. Though it may seem large by today's standards, the 390 was actually considered a balanced option between the smaller 352 and the brutish 427 and 428 engines that shared its basic architecture. Its appeal was in its dual nature. It had the muscle to power Thunderbirds, Galaxies, and Mustangs with a satisfying rush of torque, but it was also civilized enough to serve in family sedans and pickups without excessive thirst or noise. With horsepower ratings ranging from 265 to over 400 depending on configuration and model year, the 390 was flexible, tunable, and dependable. One of the most famous applications of the 390 came in 1968 when Steve McQueen's Highland Green Mustang Fastback and Bullet thundered through San Francisco streets with a 390 under the hood. That scene cemented the engine's cool factor in American culture. But beyond Hollywood, the 390 also saw action in police interceptors, work trucks, and even some high-performance Mercury models like the Marauder and S55. By the mid-1970s, however, the writing was on the wall. The 390's iron-heavy construction and older valve train design made it less efficient and harder to adapt to the rising demands of emissions, compliance, and fuel economy. It was gradually phased out in favor of the newer 335 series engines like the 400 and 351M. Yet the 390 remains a respected symbol of a time when V8s were judged by feel as much as figures. It may not be the smallest engine on this list, but it represents a shrinking era when even mid-range V8s carried the spirit of the muscle car movement. Number 37. Chrysler 360 cubic inch, 5.9 liter, V8, 1971 to 2002. The Chrysler 360 V8, introduced in 1971, was the last and largest displacement of the LA small block engine family. While its 5.9-liter size might seem substantial, it was born out of an industry-wide shift toward lighter, more compact V8s that could still offer respectable torque without the bulk of traditional big blocks. In many ways, the 360 perfectly embodied the direction American automakers were forced to take during the 1970s, downsizing without entirely sacrificing V8 strength. Unlike the earlier 318, which prioritized reliability and economy, the 360 had more performance intent baked in. It featured a longer stroke, larger bore, and higher compression options in its early years. Early versions made up to 255 horsepower and over 350 pound-feet of torque, offering drivers solid low-end grunt in a wide range of Dodge and Plymouth vehicles. The engine quickly found a home in everything from the Challenger and Duster to the Monaco and Chrysler New Yorker. As emissions regulations tightened and fuel prices rose, Chrysler retuned the 360 for lower compression and cleaner emissions. Still, it soldiered on through the smog era, outlasting many of its V8 peers. In the 1980s and 90s, the 360 became a staple in Dodge vans, Ram trucks, and even Jeep Wagoneers. Later versions came equipped with electronic fuel injection, which gave the aging small block new life in the computer-controlled automotive age. Though it was never as glamorous as a Hemi or as revered as the 340, the 360's longevity tells its own story. It remained in production for over 30 years, remarkable for a V8 in the era of constant change. And as one of the last pushrod engines to serve in everything from police cars to pickups, the Chrysler 360 stands as a symbol of V8 adaptability. It may be on the larger end of this list, but in terms of purpose-built practicality, it fit perfectly into the emerging world of compact performance. Number 36. AMC 360 cubic inch, 5.9 liter, V8, 1970 to 1991. The AMC 360 V8 was introduced in 1970 as part of American Motors Corporation's second-generation V8 lineup, and while its 5.9-liter displacement might suggest brute force, this engine was actually designed with flexibility and efficiency in mind. It was AMC's answer to the growing need for a middle-ground V8, something that could deliver solid torque for full-size cars and SUVs, while maintaining a smaller footprint and lighter weight than the massive big blocks of the 1960s. Built with a thin-wall casting technique, the AMC 360 was notably lighter than it appeared on paper. It shared its basic architecture with the 304 and 401 engines, allowing AMC to streamline production across its lineup. In its earliest and most performance-oriented variants, the 360 delivered up to 290 horsepower and 395 pound-feet of torque, making it a solid performer in the AMC Rebel Machine and the Javelin. However, as the decade progressed and emissions regulations tightened, output declined significantly to as low as 175 horsepower by the late 1970s. Despite those reductions, the 360 survived thanks to its versatility. When AMC was acquired by Chrysler in the late 1980s, the engine was retained for its proven durability, especially in the Jeep Grand Wagoneer. In fact, the AMC 360 powered the Wagoneer right up until its final production year in 1991, long after many other V8s from smaller automakers had disappeared from the market. It also saw service in fleet vehicles and utility trucks, where simplicity and torque were prized over refinement. What makes the AMC 360 notable in this countdown is its quiet contribution to V8 survival during some of the industry's most difficult years. It wasn't flashy or high-revving, but it helped keep the V8 tradition alive in an era increasingly dominated by regulation and compromise. For a company as small as AMC, the longevity of the 360 V8 is nothing short of impressive. Number 35. Ford 351 cubic inch, 5.8 liter, V8 Cleveland, 1970 to 1974. The Ford 351 Cleveland V8 wasn't just another middleweight engine in the Blue Oval lineup. It was Ford's response to the muscle car era's growing hunger for high-revving, performance-tuned small blocks. Introduced in 1970 and produced through 1974 in the U.S., the 351 Cleveland differed dramatically from its Windsor cousin, emphasizing airflow and top-end power over basic utility. What set the Cleveland apart was its cylinder head design, featuring large ports and canted valves inspired by Ford's 429 Boss Big Block. This aggressive head layout gave the Cleveland a distinct advantage in breathing, making it a natural performer on the street and track. In its four-barrel configuration, especially the revered 351 C4V variant, the engine was capable of producing up to 300 horsepower with a distinctive growl and a willingness to rev that put it on par with larger, heavier V8s. It found a home in some of the most iconic Ford muscle machines, including the Mustang Mach-1, Torino GT, and even Australian Falcons, where it became a cult favorite. Though its performance credentials were never in doubt, the 351 Cleveland faced challenges. As emissions regulations and fuel economy demands tightened, the large port heads and high-flow design that made it so potent also made it difficult to tame for low-speed drivability and smog compliance. By the mid-1970s, Ford had shifted focus back to the Windsor-based 351, which was easier to produce and more adaptable to evolving emission standards. Still, the 351 Cleveland left behind a strong legacy. It stood as one of the few small-block V8s that could truly deliver big-block performance in a lighter, more compact package. For enthusiasts, it was a high-water mark of Ford engineering, a small V8 that punched far above its weight class. Though short-lived, its design influenced engine development for years to come, proving that even small V8s could be giants in the right configuration. Number 34. Ford 351 cubic inch, 5.8 liter, V8 Windsor, 1969 to 1996. The Ford 351 Windsor V8 was the workhorse counterpart to the high-revving Cleveland, and while it shared the same displacement, it pursued a different path, one of versatility, durability, and widespread application. Introduced in 1969, the 351W was essentially a stretched version of the 302 Windsor, featuring a taller deck height and longer stroke to achieve its 5.8-liter size. While its initial horsepower numbers didn't reach the dramatic highs of the Cleveland, the Windsor delivered a steady, broad torque curve that made it ideal for everyday use. The 351 Windsor became a mainstay in Ford's lineup, powering a diverse range of vehicles, including the Mustang, Torino, F100 pickups, LTD, and later Broncos and Econoline vans. Early versions produced over 250 horsepower, but like many engines of its time, the Windsor saw its power figures decrease through the 1970s due to tightening emissions regulations and the switch to net horsepower ratings. Still, it endured where many others didn't. One of the Windsor's greatest strengths was its adaptability. As technology advanced, Ford updated the 351W with electronic ignition, better camshaft profiles, and eventually fuel injection in the 1980s and 90s. These upgrades allowed it to continue powering vehicles well into the era of onboard computers and stricter emissions standards. By the 1990s, the Windsor was a trusted V8 in Ford's full-size trucks and SUVs, including the F-150 and Bronco. What makes the 351 Windsor significant in the context of this countdown is how long it remained relevant. It wasn't the flashiest nor the most powerful, but it proved that a smaller V8 could evolve across decades without losing its usefulness. It was the kind of engine that quietly powered millions of vehicles without demanding the spotlight. And in the world of V8s, that quiet consistency speaks volumes. Number 33. Pontiac 350 cubic inch, 5.7-liter, V8, 1968 to 1977. The Pontiac 350 V8 arrived in 1968 during the golden age of muscle, when nearly every division of General Motors was crafting its own distinct engines rather than relying on corporate-wide powerplant. Though it shared its displacement with small blocks from Chevrolet and Oldsmobile, the Pontiac 350 was its own unique design, larger and heavier than the Chevy 350, and built on the same architecture as Pontiac's legendary 389 and 400 engines. The 350 wasn't intended to dominate drag strips, but rather to serve as a strong, mid-range engine for daily drivers and intermediate models. It found its way into a wide variety of vehicles, from the Le Mans and Firebird to full-size Catalinas and Bonnevilles. In its early iterations, the Pontiac 350 made up to 325 horsepower with a high compression setup and a 4-barrel carburetor, respectable output for an engine that wasn't marketed as a performance option. Over time, as emission standards and insurance premiums clipped the wings of muscle cars, the 350 was softened for smoother, more economical operation. By the mid-1970s, output dropped significantly, with some versions producing under 175 horsepower. Despite the reduced performance, the 350 continued to offer decent torque, making it a practical choice for buyers who wanted V8 smoothness without the cost or appetite of larger engines. What made the Pontiac 350 special was its resilience during an era of rapid change. While it was overshadowed by the more famous 400 and 455 engines in Pontiac's stable, the 350 quietly became a backbone of the lineup. It helped Pontiac navigate the increasingly restrictive environment of the 1970s, maintaining the brand's V8 identity even as the muscle car era faded. It's a reminder that even in decline, the American V8 adapted and endured. Number 32. Oldsmobile 350 cubic inch, 5.7-liter, V8, 1968 to 1980. The Oldsmobile 350 V8, introduced in 1968, was part of General Motors' era-defining move toward division-specific small-block engines that reflected each brand's engineering philosophies. Unlike the more famous Chevrolet 350, the Olds 350 was a completely separate design with different bore and stroke dimensions, block architecture, and internal components. It was a true Oldsmobile creation, built with a cast-iron block and heads, and tuned for a smooth, torquey driving experience. The engine made its debut in the Cutlass, Delta, 88, and Vista Cruiser, and was soon found in nearly every Oldsmobile model throughout the 1970s. It struck a sweet spot between performance and practicality. Early versions with high compression and 4-barrel carburetors could produce up to 325 horsepower, while later smog-era variants settled in closer to 160, 180 horsepower. What remained constant, however, was its trademark smoothness and low-end torque, which made it well-suited for cruising and effortless highway driving. The Olds 350 also gained a reputation for toughness. Its beefy bottom end, large main journals, and generous oiling system made it popular not only with consumers, but also with hot rodders and drag racers looking for a durable base to build on. A unique variant, the Oldsmobile 350 Diesel, debuted in the late 1970s, though it was poorly received due to reliability issues unrelated to the base gas engine's solid design. Though it may not have the mystique of the 455 Rocket or the widespread fame of Chevy's small block, the Oldsmobile 350 quietly served as a cornerstone of the brand's identity during a volatile decade. It offered V8 refinement in an increasingly restricted landscape and helped carry the Oldsmobile name into the modern age. This engine wasn't just smaller, it was smarter, reliable, and built for real-world American roads. Number 31. Buick 350 cubic inch, 5.7-liter, V8, 1968 to 1980. The Buick 350 V8 debuted in 1968 as part of the division's new line of small block engines, designed not to emulate the high-revving performance of other GM counterparts, but to offer a uniquely Buick interpretation of what a V8 should be. This meant smoothness, low-end torque, and durability, not redline-chasing horsepower. Though it shared its displacement figure with Chevrolet's and Oldsmobile's 350 engines, the Buick 350 was entirely its own, built on a distinct block with a different bore, stroke, deck height, and valve layout. From the outset, the Buick 350 was engineered for efficiency and reliability. It featured relatively small combustion chambers and a longer stroke compared to its rivals, giving it a torque-heavy personality that was ideal for Buick's larger sedans and mid-size cruisers. In its high-compression 4-barrel form, the engine made around 280 horsepower and over 375 pound-feet of torque, offering confident acceleration without needing to scream to high RPMs. As the 1970s progressed and emissions regulations tightened, Buick detuned the 350 significantly, like all manufacturers were forced to do. Despite the drop in advertised power, the engine remained well regarded for its refinement and longevity. It became a mainstay in models like the Skylark, LeSabre, and Electra, where quiet confidence and smooth cruising mattered more than quarter-mile times. The Buick 350 also found a second life in light trucks and even in some Jeep models during the early AMC years. Though never intended for racing glory, it earned its reputation by simply doing its job well, year after year. Its unique characteristics, such as the deep skirt block and externally mounted oil pump, set it apart in both engineering and application. Today, the Buick 350 is remembered as one of the most underappreciated small-block V8s of its time. It may not have been the loudest or the quickest, but it was arguably one of the most well-mannered and dependable. Number 30. Chevrolet 350 cubic inch, 5.7-liter, V8, 1967 to 2002. The Chevrolet 350 small block V8 is one of the most iconic engines in automotive history, and while it's often associated with muscle cars and high performance, its place on this list of the smallest V8s highlights a different story, one of scale, adaptability, and mass-market brilliance. Introduced in 1967 as a high-performance option for the Chevrolet Camaro, the 350 quickly evolved into the gold standard of American V8 engines. Its secret wasn't in outrageous horsepower or exotic materials. It was in its perfect proportions and unmatched versatility. Built on the same small block platform that began with the 265 and 283 V8s, the 350 offered an ideal balance between power, packaging, and cost. Early versions made over 300 horsepower with solid lifter cams and high compression heads, powering Corvettes, Camaros, Novas, and Chevelles through the peak muscle car years. Yet, even as emissions laws and fuel crises swept through the 1970s, the 350 survived, detuned, and emissions-equipped, yes, but still widely used across Chevrolet's full lineup. It became the go-to engine not just for performance cars, but for trucks, station wagons, vans, and even boats and industrial equipment. The 350 wasn't merely an engine, it was an institution. Over the decades, GM refined it with electronic fuel injection, computer controls, and improved materials. By the 1990s, the legendary 350, now known as the L5 or L31 Vortec, was still powering Caprices, Suburbans, Silverados, and more, proving its relevance even in the modern era. What makes the Chevrolet 350's inclusion here so fitting is that it defined the upper ceiling of what a small block could be. It blurred the line between everyday practicality and performance legend. And though it was never the smallest by displacement, its compact design, adaptability, and long-running influence make it one of the greatest small V8s ever built. Number 29. Pontiac 326 cubic inch, 5.3 liter, V8, 1963 to 1967. The Pontiac 326 V8 was introduced in 1963 as a response to growing demand for smaller displacement V8 engines in compact and intermediate-sized cars. Though it was technically larger than the 326 badge suggested, actually displacing 336 cubic inches in its first year, Pontiac rounded down to fit GM's internal displacement cap, which limited compact cars to engines under 330 cubic inches. This clever marketing allowed the 326 to be slotted into the Tempest and Le Mans, giving buyers access to V8 performance without stepping up to larger, heavier models. Built on the same basic block as the larger 389 and 421 engines, the 326 shared Pontiac's trademark torque-heavy personality. Early versions with two-barrel carburetors made around 250 horsepower, while high-performance four-barrel variants with upgraded cams could push output north of 280 horsepower. In a lighter mid-size body, that was more than enough to make the car feel lively and responsive, especially by early 1960 standards. The 326 played an important role in Pontiac's transformation during the muscle car era. It served as the gateway engine for drivers who wanted V8 power without the insurance premiums or fuel costs of the big block options. It was also the predecessor to the legendary 350 and 400 cubic inch V8s that would dominate Pontiac's lineup later in the decade. Although it was discontinued in 1967, the Pontiac 326 proved that smaller displacement V8s could still deliver a strong balance of power and efficiency. It helped make performance more accessible, more manageable, and more appealing to a new generation of American drivers. On a list that celebrates the smallest production V8s, the 326 stands out as an early pioneer of compact V8 philosophy, purposeful, underrated, and distinctly Pontiac. Number 28. Oldsmobile 330 cubic inch, 5.4 liter, V8, 1964 to 1967. The Oldsmobile 330 V8 made its debut in 1964 as part of a new generation of lightweight, mid-size engines designed to meet the needs of a changing market. As the muscle car era was just beginning to take shape, GM divisions were exploring ways to bring V8 power to more affordable, intermediate-sized cars. The 330 was Oldsmobile's answer. A refined, well-balanced V8 that delivered smooth torque and strong drivability without the excesses of big block performance. This engine was the first in Oldsmobile's small block family, and it established a strong engineering foundation that would support future legends like the 350 and 403. With its thin wall casting, the 330 was significantly lighter than the older Rocket V8s, yet it retained the hallmark Oldsmobile qualities of solid, low-end power and smoothness. Offered in both 2-barrel and 4-barrel versions, the high-output variants of the 330 could make up to 320 horsepower and over 360 pound-feet of torque, very impressive numbers for a mid-sized V8 of the time. The 330 powered many of Oldsmobile's A-body vehicles, such as the Cutlass and F-85, and played a key role in helping establish the Cutlass as one of America's best-selling nameplates. It was also the original engine offered in the early 442 models, before being replaced by larger displacements in later years. Drivers praised the 330 for its responsiveness and reliability, and mechanics appreciated its straightforward design and ease of maintenance. Although it only remained in production for a few years, the 330 represents an important transitional moment in V8 history. It bridged the gap between the bulky performance engines of the 1950s and the more efficient, compact powerplants of the 1970s. On this list of smallest V8s, it earns its place as a trailblazer, small in size, but big in impact. Number 27. Buick 340 cubic inch, 5.6 liter, V8, 1966 to 1967. The Buick 340 V8 was a short-lived but significant part of Buick's transition during the mid-1960s, designed to fill the performance and size gap between the economical 300 and the larger, more powerful 400 series engines. Introduced in 1966 and produced for just 2 model years, the 340 was Buick's answer to growing consumer demand for a mid-size V8 that offered more grunt than an entry-level engine, but didn't carry the bulk or cost of a big block. Built on the same basic architecture as the Buick 300, the 340 utilized an iron block and heads, ditching the aluminum heads that had been used in some earlier 300. With a bore of 3.75 inches and a stroke of 3.85 inches, the 340 delivered a well-balanced torque curve that favored low and mid-range power, exactly what Buick drivers had come to expect. It was available with both 2-barrel and 4-barrel carburetors, with the latter producing up to 260 horsepower and 365 pound-feet of torque, more than adequate for pushing mid-size Buicks with a smooth, confident pull. The 340 was primarily offered in models like the Special and Skylark, where it complemented Buick's emphasis on quiet, refined cruising. It wasn't built for racing or revving to the red line. Instead, it delivered relaxed performance that matched the brand's luxury-oriented identity. While it never achieved the fame of the Nailhead or Stage 1 455, the 340 served a very practical role during its brief production window. It was ultimately replaced by the more versatile and longer-lived 350 in 1968, but the 340 deserves recognition as part of Buick's thoughtful engineering lineage. It represents the shrinking of the V8 format during an age of experimentation and refinement. Small by displacement compared to earlier V8s, yet rich in character, the Buick 340 was a quiet performer that laid groundwork for engines to come. Number 26. Chevrolet 327 cubic inch, 5.4 liter, V8, 1962 to 1969. The Chevrolet 327 V8 is one of the most beloved and versatile engines to ever emerge from General Motors' golden era of small block innovation. Introduced in 1962, the 327 took the existing 283 small block and pushed it to new heights by increasing the stroke while maintaining the same bore. The result was a compact, high-revving engine with outstanding breathing capability and a reputation for balance, responsiveness, and performance. From the moment it debuted, the 327 found its way into a wide array of Chevrolet vehicles, including the Corvette, Impala, Nova, Camaro, and Chevelle. It was available in a variety of configurations, ranging from mild 2-barrel carburetor setups producing around 250 horsepower to high compression, high-performance versions with solid lifter cams, dual exhausts, and fuel injection, delivering up to 375 horsepower. The Rochester mechanical fuel injection system, though expensive and temperamental,
Chevy
allowed the 327 to become one of the first American engines to reach and exceed the coveted 1 horsepower per cubic inch benchmark in regular production. The 327's true genius lay in its flexibility. It was just as comfortable powering a boulevard cruiser as it was dominating on the drag strip. Tuners and hot rodders loved it for its rev-happy nature and compatibility with the entire small-block Chevy parts catalog. Its short stroke gave it a lively character, and in lightweight cars, it provided exhilarating acceleration with a screaming redline. Though it was eventually phased out in favor of the more torque-focused 350, the 327 remains a high point in Chevrolet's small-block evolution. It proved that a V8 didn't need big displacement to deliver big thrills. Compact, potent, and endlessly tunable, the 327 deserves its reputation as one of the greatest small V8s ever built. Number 25. Chrysler 318 cubic inch, 5.2 liter, V8, 1967 to 2003. The Chrysler 318 V8 may not be the flashiest engine on this list, but it is unquestionably one of the most enduring and respected. Introduced in 1967 as part of Chrysler's LA, Light A, engine family, the 318 was engineered with a focus on reliability, smooth operation, and easy maintenance, attributes that helped it remain in production for over 3 decades. With a displacement of 318 cubic inches, or 5.2 liters, this engine found its home in everything from Dodge Darts and Plymouth Satellites to Ram pickups and Chrysler New Yorkers. Early versions of the 318 used a 2-barrel carburetor and produced around 230 horsepower, making them ideal for buyers who wanted V8 power without the fuel consumption or price tag of larger engines. While it was never marketed as a high-performance option, the 318 offered consistent low-end torque and remarkable longevity, especially when paired with Chrysler's rugged TorqueFlite automatic transmission. It was a perfect fit for mainstream drivers looking for dependable, everyday performance. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, as emission standards tightened and horsepower figures dropped, the 318 soldiered on. Chrysler continued to refine the engine, eventually introducing electronic ignition systems and, in the late 1980s, fuel injection. These updates helped modernize the aging platform and kept it competitive into the early 1990s, when it was still a standard engine in Dodge Ram trucks and Jeep Grand Wagoneers. The 318's success lies in its quiet dependability. It never made headlines, but it powered millions of vehicles and earned the trust of generations of American drivers. For an engine that started out as a modest small block in the muscle car era, the Chrysler 318 proved that longevity and usefulness could be just as impressive as raw power. Number 24. Ford 312 cubic inch, 5.1 liter, V8, 1956 to 1960. The Ford 312 V8 was the final and most powerful evolution of Ford's Y-block engine family, a series that served as the company's first true overhead valve V8s. Introduced in 1956, the 312 was intended as a premium offering, available primarily in high-end models like the Thunderbird and Mercury Montclair. With a displacement of 312 cubic inches, or 5.1 liters, the engine offered a significant step up in performance over the earlier 292 and 272 versions. In its early form, the 312 produced around 215 horsepower with a 4-barrel carburetor. But the most famous variant was the optional Thunderbird Special, or E-Code version, which came with dual 4-barrel carburetors and delivered up to 270 horsepower. Later, a supercharged version was introduced, most notably in the 1957 Thunderbird and select full-size Fords, which pushed output to 300 horsepower and beyond. This made the 312 one of the first American engines to achieve such numbers in a regular production vehicle. The Y-block engines were known for their deep, rugged construction and excellent oiling at high RPMs, though their vertical stacked intake ports somewhat restricted airflow compared to later designs. Still, the 312 delivered impressive mid-century performance and helped cement Ford's reputation as a serious player in the horsepower wars of the late 1950s. By 1960, the Y-block was being phased out in favor of the new FE engine series, which offered better breathing and greater displacement potential. But the 312 had already made its mark, especially in the Thunderbird, where it helped define the car's early image as a stylish, high-performance personal coupe. In the story of small but mighty V8s, the Ford 312 stands as a bridge between post-war innovation and the muscle-bound future to come. Number 23. Chevrolet 307 cubic inch, 5-liter, V8, 1968 to 1973. The Chevrolet 307 V8 is often overlooked in discussions of iconic small blocks, yet it played a vital role during a transitional period in American automotive history. Introduced in 1968, the 307 was a hybrid of sorts, combining the 283's 3.875-inch bore with the 327's longer 3.25-inch stroke. This clever parts-bin engineering allowed Chevrolet to produce an engine that met the growing need for a smooth, efficient V8 with decent torque and economy. Initially rated at 200 horsepower with a 2-barrel carburetor, the 307 was never meant to be a high-performance option. Instead, it found its place under the hoods of everyday cars like the Impala, Chevelle, and Nova, where it provided quiet, dependable service for families and commuters alike. It was also a popular engine in trucks, where its torquey character and simple architecture made it a favorite among mechanics. The 307 came to symbolize the shift away from pure performance toward more practical motoring. It arrived just as emissions controls and insurance premiums were beginning to strangle the muscle car movement. Chevrolet responded by building engines like the 307 that could meet new regulations without alienating traditional V8 buyers. And while enthusiasts didn't line up to modify or race the 307, it proved to be a solid, long-lasting engine that lived quietly in the background. By 1973, the 307 was phased out in favor of the more versatile 305, which would carry the torch for small displacement GM V8s into the 1980s. Today, the 307 is remembered more for its utility than excitement, but it played its role faithfully during an era of uncertainty and change. On this list of smallest V8s, the Chevrolet 307 earns its place as a humble workhorse, reliable, affordable, and exactly what many drivers needed when the muscle car dream began to fade. Number 22. Oldsmobile 307 cubic inch, 5-liter, V8, 1980 to 1990. The Oldsmobile 307 V8 arrived at a time when the American car market was evolving rapidly, and its role was to offer traditional V8 smoothness in an era increasingly dominated by downsizing and efficiency. Introduced in 1980, the 307 was based on Oldsmobile's durable small block architecture and was essentially a bored-out version of the earlier 260 and 273 engines. With 5 liters of displacement, it became the go-to V8 for many GM vehicles during the 1980s, particularly in full-size sedans, wagons, and coupes. This engine was not designed for high performance, but for smooth, dependable operation. With outputs typically ranging from 140 to 180 horsepower, depending on the configuration, the 307 was tuned for torque and drivability rather than speed. It featured a cast-iron block, hydraulic lifters, and a relatively mild cam profile, all of which contributed to its reputation for longevity and quiet operation. One of the 307's most iconic applications was in the Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme, which became one of America's best-selling cars during the early 1980s. It was also used extensively in Buicks, Cadillacs, and even some Pontiac and Chevrolet models, often with badges and branding that disguised its Oldsmobile origins. A special version, the 307 HO, high output, was offered in performance-oriented cars like the Hearst, Olds, and 442, featuring a slightly more aggressive camshaft and dual exhausts, though still modest by muscle car standards. What makes the Oldsmobile 307 notable on this list is its quiet success. It wasn't a fire breather or a race winner, but it provided millions of drivers with reliable V8 power during a time when such engines were becoming rare. The 307 helped maintain the presence of the V8 in the everyday American car, proving that refinement and endurance could matter just as much as raw horsepower. Number 21. Chevrolet 305 cubic inch, 5-liter, V8, 1976 to 1998. The Chevrolet 305 V8 was introduced in 1976 as a response to the tightening fuel economy and emission standards that were reshaping the American automotive landscape. With a displacement of 305 cubic inches, or 5 liters, it was essentially a downsized version of the 350, designed to deliver acceptable performance while improving efficiency. Built on the same small-block Chevy architecture, the 305 used a smaller 3.736-inch bore while retaining the 350's 3.48-inch stroke. The 305 quickly became one of GM's most widely used V8 engines. It powered everything from mid-size Malibus and Monte Carlos to full-size Caprices and even light trucks. While it was never a performance champion, it proved to be a capable and reliable power plant for everyday driving. Horsepower ranged from 130 to around 220 depending on the year and configuration, with the high-output variants being reserved for sportier models like the IROC Z Camaro and Monte Carlo SS. By the 1980s, the 305 became a central figure in GM's emissions strategy. It was one of the first small blocks to receive electronic fuel injection and computer-controlled ignition, allowing it to meet federal and state standards without sacrificing drivability. Its compatibility with existing small block components also made it easy to maintain and service, adding to its appeal among mechanics and fleet operators. Though often overshadowed by the legendary 350, the 305 deserves credit for keeping the V8 tradition alive during one of its most vulnerable periods. It struck a careful balance between size, performance, and economy, traits that aligned with the needs of a new generation of car buyers. On this list of smallest production V8s, the Chevrolet 305 represents the pragmatic side of American engine design, unglamorous but essential. Number 20. Ford 302 cubic inch, 5-liter, V8, 1968 to 2001. The Ford 302 V8, more famously known in later years as the 5, is one of the most enduring and celebrated small-block engines in American history. Introduced in 1968, the 302 was created as a longer stroke version of the 289, using the same 4-inch bore but increasing the stroke to 3 inches. This small block was designed to deliver a balance of compact packaging, decent horsepower, and reliability, fitting perfectly into Ford's growing fleet of midsize and pony cars. Initially, the 302 was offered in cars like the Mustang, Fairlane, and Falcon, where it served as an ideal middleweight V8, more spirited than a 6-cylinder but not as thirsty as the larger FE series engines. Early versions topped out around 230 horsepower with a 4-barrel carburetor, but the engine's design proved to have long-term potential. That potential would be fully realized in the 1980s when Ford rebranded the 302 as the 5 and brought it roaring back into the spotlight. The fuel-injected 5 became the heart of the Fox-body Mustang GT, where its mix of performance and affordability revitalized the muscle car genre for a new generation. With roller camshafts, electronic fuel injection, and performance-tuned intakes, late 1980s and early 90s 5 Mustangs offered up to 225 horsepower in a lightweight, rear-wheel drive package that was endlessly modifiable. The 302 wasn't just for Mustangs, it also found its way into trucks, vans, and luxury sedans, showcasing its incredible versatility. What made the 302 so important was its ability to adapt over time. It remained relevant from the muscle car era through the computer-controlled age. For many enthusiasts, The sound of a 5 V8 rumbling through dual exhausts is the soundtrack of American performance. Compact in size but mighty in reputation, the Ford 302 deserves its legendary status. Number 19. AMC 304 cubic inch, 5-liter, V8, 1970 to 1987. The AMC 304 V8 made its debut in 1970 as part of American Motors Corporation's second-generation small-block engine family, a lineup developed to bring compact efficiency to the company's growing range of performance and utility vehicles. With a displacement of 304 cubic inches, or exactly 5 liters, this V8 was aimed squarely at buyers who wanted traditional American power in a lighter, more economical package. It served as a bridge between AMC's smaller inline sixes and the more potent 360 and 401 V8s. The 304 was constructed using thin-wall casting technology, which made it relatively light for a cast-iron engine and well-suited to AMC's smaller muscle cars like the Javelin and AMX. Early versions produced up to 210 horsepower and over 300 pound-feet of torque, respectable figures for an entry-level V8 during the muscle car era. However, like most engines of the time, the 304 saw its output decrease in the mid-1970s due to emissions regulations and the switch to net horsepower ratings. Where the 304 truly found its niche was in utility applications. AMC's acquisition of Jeep in 1970 gave the engine a second life in off-road vehicles like the Jeep CJ and Wagoneer. In these models, the engine's torque-rich character and durability made it a favorite among off-road enthusiasts and rural drivers. It remained in Jeep vehicles well into the 1980s, long after AMC had shifted its car lineup towards smaller, more efficient engines. The AMC 304 never tried to be a muscle car hero. Instead, it was a dependable workhorse that proved a smaller V8 could still deliver big utility. On this list, the 304 represents the quiet strength of practical engineering, modest in size, broad in purpose, and essential to AMC's identity during a period of great change. Number 18. Pontiac 301 cubic inch, 4.9-liter, V8, 1977 to 1981. The Pontiac 301 V8 was a bold and unconventional attempt to adapt V8 performance to the increasingly restrictive automotive environment of the late 1970s. Introduced in 1977, the 301, also referred to as the 4.9L, was the smallest displacement V8 Pontiac had produced to date. Unlike most of its predecessors, which were designed with muscle in mind, the 301 was built with efficiency, emissions, compliance, and weight savings as its primary goals. The 301 was not merely a bored or stroked version of Pontiac's earlier small blocks. It was an entirely new design with a shorter deck height, thinner block walls, and lighter internal components, all intended to reduce engine mass and internal friction. With these changes, the 301 weighed significantly less than traditional Pontiac V8s, making it well-suited for lighter vehicles and better fuel economy. In most configurations, the 301 delivered between 135 and 170 horsepower, respectable for the era, but a far cry from the tire-burning engines Pontiac was once known for. However, in 1980 and 1981, Pontiac engineers pushed the envelope with a turbocharged version of the 301, which produced up to 210 horsepower. This version was famously featured in the 1980-81 Pontiac Trans Am, where it was marketed as a high-tech alternative to displacement-heavy performance. Though it suffered from turbo lag and inconsistent power delivery, it remains a fascinating early example of forced induction in American V8 design. The 301 was ultimately discontinued in 1981 as Pontiac began phasing out its V8 development in favor of shared GM engines. Yet, its place on this list is secure. It represented a shift in philosophy, from brute force to intelligent efficiency, and proved that even small V8s could carry the badge of innovation. In a time when the V8 was being squeezed from every angle, the Pontiac 301 stood as a creative response to survive and evolve. Number 17. Buick 300 cubic inch, 4.9 liter, V8, 1964 to 1967. The Buick 300 V8 was introduced in 1964 as part of General Motors' move to offer more efficient, lighter-weight engine options for its intermediate cars. Though it shared the same displacement as earlier nailhead V8s, this engine was completely different in design, built on Buick's new lightweight architecture. The 300 marked an evolutionary step between the compact aluminum 215 V8 of the early 1960s and the larger 340 and 350 engines that would follow. One of the most notable features of the 1964 Buick 300 was its use of aluminum cylinder heads and intake manifold, a nod to the engineering approach of the earlier 215. This gave the engine a significant weight advantage over many cast-iron contemporaries, improving both handling and fuel economy in cars like the Buick, Special, and Skylark. The engine featured a 3.7 5-inch bore and 3.4-inch stroke, and in its four-barrel form, it produced up to 250 horsepower and 335 pound-feet of torque. Buick replaced the aluminum components with cast iron in 1965. Increasing durability but also adding weight. Even so, the 300 retained its reputation as a smooth, torquey engine, ideal for buyers who wanted refined V8 performance in a compact package. Its short, wide design allowed it to fit easily into a variety of mid-sized GM cars without sacrificing interior space or front-end balance. The 300 was phased out after 1967, replaced by the larger displacement Buick 340. But its influence was lasting, forming the basis for Buick's small-block V8 family for years to come. For its blend of innovation, lightweight engineering, and real-world usability, the Buick 300 earns its spot on this list. It was a forward-looking engine during a time of big horsepower, and it proved that smaller V8s could be just as sophisticated. Number 16. Cadillac 4.9-liter V8, 1991 to 1995. The Cadillac 4.9-liter V8 arrived in 1991 as the final evolution of Cadillac's HT, high-technology, engine family, serving as a bridge between the old-school pushrod era and the modern age of sophisticated power plants. With a displacement of 4.9 liters, equivalent to 300 cubic inches, this engine marked the culmination of Cadillac's efforts during the 1980s and early 90s to build smoother, cleaner, and more efficient V8s that met the expectations of luxury buyers and regulatory agencies alike. Unlike the earlier 4.1-liter and 4.5-liter versions of the HT series, the 4.9-liter was relatively well regarded for its improved reliability, refined power delivery, and solid low-end torque. It retained the aluminum block and heads of its predecessors, but incorporated better cooling, stronger internals, and updated fuel management systems. The engine delivered 200 horsepower and 275 pound-feet of torque, figures that, while modest by muscle car standards, were perfectly adequate for propelling Cadillac's large sedans with quiet confidence. The 4.9-liter was mated to the 4T60E electronically controlled automatic transmission, offering smoother shifting and improved efficiency. It powered key models like the DeVille, Seville, and Eldorado, helping Cadillac retain its identity as a purveyor of smooth V8 luxury during a time when V6 engines were becoming the norm. It didn't aim to be sporty or aggressive, but instead focused on delivering effortless cruising and long-distance comfort, hallmarks of Cadillac's brand ethos. Though it was soon replaced by the technologically advanced Northstar DOHC V8 in 1996, the 4.9-liter represented the end of an era. It was Cadillac's final, traditional, pushrod-based V8 developed in-house before the company pivoted to more modern, performance-oriented powertrain. On this list of smallest production V8s, the Cadillac 4.9-liter stands as a symbol of refinement, an engine that prioritized grace over aggression in a rapidly evolving automotive world. Number 15. Cadillac 4.5-liter V8, 1988 to 1990. The Cadillac 4.5-liter V8 produced from 1988 to 1990, marked a turning point in Cadillac's journey toward modernizing its powertrains during a time when the brand was striving to regain its reputation for innovation and luxury. Following the underwhelming and problem-ridden 4.1-liter HT4000, 100, the 4.5-liter was introduced as a vastly improved version of the same high-technology HT engine family. With better engineering, updated materials, and more refined electronics, the 4.5-liter aimed to restore faith in Cadillac V8s during a period of industry transition. With an aluminum block and heads, the engine was significantly lighter than traditional cast-iron designs. This not only improved fuel efficiency, but also contributed to better handling dynamics in front-wheel drive platforms like the Cadillac DeVille, Eldorado, and Seville. The 4.5-liter V8 delivered between 155 and 200 horsepower, depending on model year and tuning, along with up to 270 pound-feet of torque, enough to move Cadillac's large luxury sedans with authority and composure. One of the most notable features of the 4.5-liter was its smooth power delivery and quiet operation, which were crucial for maintaining Cadillac's identity as a luxury brand. It also benefited from sequential port fuel injection and improved engine management systems, allowing for cleaner emissions and better drivability than its predecessor. For the time, the engine represented a sophisticated approach to balancing tradition with modern expectations. Though its production life was brief, the 4.5-liter laid the groundwork for the even more refined 4.9-liter that followed. It helped Cadillac weather a period of skepticism and changing buyer tastes, proving that a smaller V8 could still uphold the brand's core promise of effortless performance. On this list, the 4.5-liter earns its place as a quiet yet essential chapter in the story of compact American luxury V8s. Number 14. Cadillac 4.1-liter HT4000 100 V8, 1982 to 1985. The Cadillac 4.1-liter HT4000 100 V8, introduced in 1982, was a bold but ultimately flawed attempt by General Motors to modernize the Cadillac lineup in response to growing fuel economy demands, tighter emissions regulations, and increased competition from European luxury brands. The HT in its name stood for high technology, a signal that Cadillac was trying to move away from its big block heritage and embrace cutting-edge innovation. On paper, the engine looked like a leap forward. Constructed with an aluminum block and cast-iron heads, the 4.1-liter HT4000 100 was designed to be lightweight and fuel-efficient. It featured digital fuel injection and onboard diagnostics, impressive features for the early 1980s. The engine produced around 135 horsepower and 190 pound-feet of torque, modest by Cadillac standards but in line with what was expected for a luxury cruiser at the time. Its true aim was to deliver smooth, quiet operation in vehicles like the Eldorado, Seville, and DeVille, while improving fuel efficiency over the massive V8s of the 1970s. However, in real-world use, the HT4000 100 was plagued with issues. The mismatch of aluminum and iron components led to gasket failures and coolant leaks. Many owners reported reliability problems, and the engine developed a reputation for being underpowered and fragile. Cadillac attempted to remedy these problems in later years, but the damage to the engine's reputation was already done. Despite its shortcomings, the 4.1-liter HT4000 100 holds historical significance. It marked Cadillac's first serious push toward electronic engine controls and downsized V8s, setting the stage for more refined and successful successors like the 4.5-liter and 4.9L. While it may not have been a performance star, the HT4000 100 represented the growing pains of a brand and an industry trying to reinvent itself. It stands as a reminder that innovation often comes with risk, especially when downsizing an American icon. Number 13. Ford 289 cubic inch, 4.7-liter, V8, 1963 to 1968. The Ford 289 V8 is one of the most celebrated small block engines in American automotive history, thanks to its critical role in launching the original Mustang and helping define the early muscle car era. Introduced in 1963 as part of the Windsor engine family, the 289 was designed to offer lightweight performance in Ford's growing lineup of compact and mid-size vehicles. With a bore and stroke of 4x 2.87 inches, the 289 struck a perfect balance between rev-happy agility and dependable low-end torque. Early versions of the engine produced between 195 and 225 horsepower, depending on carburation and compression. But its most famous variant was the high-performance Hi-Po 289, designated as the K-Code. This version, equipped with solid lifters, a hotter camshaft, and a higher compression ratio, churned out 271 horsepower and quickly became the engine of choice for enthusiasts and racers. The 289 truly earned its place in the spotlight in 1965 when it was installed under the hood of the first Ford Mustang GT. It offered lively acceleration and an intoxicating exhaust note, all while being compact enough to fit in the Mustang's lightweight chassis. Carroll Shelby saw its potential and used the 289 in the early Shelby GT 350, turning the modest pony car into a legitimate track weapon. Despite its relatively small displacement, the 289 proved that performance wasn't just about size, it was about engineering. It was also widely used in other Ford products, including the Fairlane, Falcon, and even some export models, demonstrating its flexibility and reliability. The Ford 289 was eventually replaced by the 302 in 1968, but its legacy lives on. It symbolized the idea that a small V8 could deliver big thrills. For many enthusiasts, it was their first taste of V8 performance, and one they would never forget. Number 12. Chevrolet 283 cubic inch, 4.6 liter, V8, 1957 to 1967. The Chevrolet 283 V8 holds a legendary place in American automotive history as one of the most important small block engines ever built. Introduced in 1957 as an evolution of the original 265 small block, the 283 offered more displacement, more power, and unprecedented performance potential in a compact package. With its 3.87 5-inch bore and 3-inch stroke, the engine was well-balanced and versatile, perfect for a wide range of applications. The 283 was offered in everything from full-size Chevrolets like the Bel Air and Impala to the Corvette sports car, and it quickly gained a reputation for reliability and impressive output for its size. In its early carbureted forms, the 283 produced between 185 and 220 horsepower, but its real breakthrough came when it became the first production engine to achieve 1 horsepower per cubic inch. This milestone was reached in 1957 with the optional Rochester mechanical fuel injection system pushing the 283 to a then revolutionary 283 horsepower. That figure wasn't just a marketing gimmick, it was a statement that small V8s could deliver serious performance. The 283 helped solidify Chevrolet's dominance in the V8 market and laid the groundwork for an entire family of small block engines that would power GM vehicles for decades. It was also a favorite among hot rodders and tuners who appreciated its simplicity, responsiveness, and vast aftermarket support. By the mid-1960s, the 283 was gradually phased out in favor of the larger 327 and 350 small blocks, but it remained in production through 1967 and continued to power lower trim cars and trucks. On this list of smallest production V8s, the 283 stands as a trailblazer. It proved that high performance could come in small packages, and it forever changed the expectations of what a small block V8 could achieve. Number 11. Chevrolet 267 cubic inch, 4.4 liter, V8, 1979 to 1982. The Chevrolet 267 V8 was introduced in 1979 as one of General Motors' most compact small-block V8s, created specifically to address the era's growing emphasis on fuel economy, emissions compliance, and cost-cutting. At just 267 cubic inches, or 4.4 liters, it represented the smallest displacement ever offered in a production Chevrolet V8. This engine was designed not for power, but for practicality, serving as a bridge between the declining muscle car era and the more efficiency-focused mindset of the 1980s. The 267 shared its architecture with the rest of Chevrolet's small block family, which meant it retained the basic layout, bolt patterns, and ease of maintenance that made those engines so popular. However, it featured a very small 3.5-inch bore, which severely limited breathing and thus performance potential. It came exclusively with a 2-barrel carburetor and produced a modest 120 to 140 horsepower, depending on the application and model year. Despite its lack of performance credentials, the 267 found its way into a variety of GM vehicles, including the Chevrolet Malibu, Monte Carlo, and Camaro. It was also offered in Pontiac and Oldsmobile variants of GM's rear-wheel drive A and G-body platform. The goal was to give customers the smoothness and sound of a V8 while complying with increasingly strict emissions regulations. In practice, the 267 struggled to deliver excitement. It was slow revving, underpowered, and quickly became obsolete once better-performing small V8s and V6 engines became available with more advanced fuel systems. It was quietly dropped after 1982 and remains one of the lesser-known members of the small-block Chevy family. Still, the 267 earns its place on this list as a symbol of the V8's adaptability. Even in a time of economic downturn and environmental regulation, GM found a way to keep the V8 alive, no matter how small or subdued it had to be. Number 10. Chevrolet 265 cubic inch, 4.3 liter, V8, 1955 to 1957. The Chevrolet 265 V8 is one of the most important engines in American automotive history, not just for its specifications, but for the revolution it sparked in the mid-1950s. Introduced in 1955, the 265 was Chevrolet's first modern overhead valve V8 engine and marked the beginning of the legendary small-block Chevy family. With its compact size, lightweight, and innovative design, it instantly transformed Chevrolet's image from staid and sensible to modern and performance-driven. Developed under the leadership of engineer Ed Cole, the 265 featured a 3.75-inch bore and 3-inch stroke. It made 162 horsepower with a 2-barrel carburetor in its base form and up to 180 horsepower in the Power Pack version with a 4-barrel and dual exhausts. By 1956, performance jumped even higher, with a solid-lifter Super Power Pack version producing 225 horsepower, impressive output for such a small displacement engine at the time. This engine was compact enough to fit into nearly any engine bay and light enough to maintain balanced handling in GM's passenger cars. The 1955 Bel Air, which debuted with the 265, became an instant classic, not just for its styling, but for its newfound power and drivability. The engine's wedge-shaped combustion chambers and efficient pushrod design laid the groundwork for countless small-block variants that would follow. Though the 265 was replaced by the larger 283 in 1957, it left behind a legacy far greater than its size suggests. It proved that a compact V8 could offer not only economy and simplicity, but also thrilling performance and endless tuning potential. Today, it's remembered not just as Chevrolet's first small block, but as the beginning of an era where small displacement V8s would become the heart of American performance for generations. Number 9. Ford 260 cubic inch, 4.3 liter, V8, 1962 to 1964. The Ford 260 V8 was a pivotal engine in the development of Ford's small-block V8 lineup, marking the company's first step into compact, lightweight performance engines. Introduced in 1962, the 260 was essentially a stroked version of the earlier 221 V8, and it would go on to serve as the direct predecessor to both the iconic 289 and 302 small block. It featured a 3.8-inch bore and a 2.87-inch stroke, giving it 260 cubic inches of displacement, or roughly 4.3 liters. With an output of around 164 to 170 horsepower and 258 pound-feet of torque, the 260 wasn't a high-performance monster by any stretch. But it provided smooth, responsive power in a smaller, lighter package that was ideal for Ford's compact and midsize cars of the era. It was first used in models like the Fairlane and Falcon, where it offered V8 power in a platform traditionally reserved for six-cylinder engines. The 260 gained historical significance when it became the first V8 engine installed in the original 1964 first-half Ford Mustang. It was also the engine that powered the very first production Shelby Cobra, a car that would go on to become one of the most legendary performance machines ever built. The engine's compact size and light weight made it an ideal fit for Carroll Shelby's vision of combining British sports car agility with American V8 muscle. Though it was only in production for a short time, the Ford 260 laid the foundation for some of the most influential V8s in history. It proved that small displacement didn't mean small potential. On this list of smallest V8s ever made, the 260 earns its place as a true transitional engine, humble in numbers but monumental in impact. Number 8. Ford 260 cubic inch, 4.3 liter, V8, Shelby Cobra variant, 1962 to 1963. The Ford 260 cubic inch V8 took on an entirely different identity when it was chosen to power the very first Shelby Cobra, one of the most legendary performance cars in automotive history. While the 260 had already proven itself in Ford's compact sedans and coupes, its installation in the lightweight British AC Ace Roadster was a stroke of genius by Carroll Shelby. This marked the beginning of a transatlantic partnership that would change the landscape of sports car performance. Shelby chose the 260 not because it was the most powerful engine available, but because it was compact, lightweight, and readily available from Ford. Its small size allowed it to fit neatly into the AC Ace's narrow engine bay, while its relatively simple pushrod design made it easy to service and modify. In the Shelby Cobra, the 260 produced about 260 horsepower, a major increase over its output in stock Ford applications, thanks to Shelby's tuning expertise. The result was astonishing. The combination of a lightweight chassis and a torquey V8 gave the early Cobras a power-to-weight ratio that rivaled or exceeded that of far more expensive European exotics. Even though the 260 would soon be replaced by the more powerful 289 and later Cobras, its role as the first engine in the Shelby Cobra legacy remains historically significant. The Ford 260 and the Cobra proved that engine size isn't everything. With the right car and the right tuning, even a modestly sized V8 could become a world-beating powerhouse. It wasn't just a stepping stone, it was a spark that ignited a revolution in American performance engineering. On this list, the Cobra-tuned 260 stands as a shining example of how a small V8 can punch far above its weight. Number 7. Oldsmobile 260 cubic inch, 4.3 liter, V8, 1975 to 1982. The Oldsmobile 260 cubic inch V8 was introduced in 1975 as part of General Motors' strategy to meet the growing demand for fuel-efficient, emissions-compliant engines during the post-oil crisis era. With a displacement of just 4.3 liters, the 260 was the smallest of Oldsmobile's V8 offerings and was designed specifically to provide traditional V8 smoothness in a downsized, lightweight format. Built on the same basic architecture as the larger 307 and 350 Olds small blocks, it featured a smaller bore and was intended to slot into compact and mid-size cars without overwhelming them. The 260 was never a performance engine. With outputs ranging from 110 to 125 horsepower, it was tuned for smooth operation and reliability rather than speed or brute force. It came equipped with a two-barrel carburetor and modest compression ratios, which made it easy to live with on the road and compliant with the strict emission standards of the day. It was commonly found in vehicles like the Oldsmobile, Omega, Cutlass, and Buick Skylark, where it served as a middle ground option between the underpowered inline sixes and thirstier, larger V8s. Interestingly, the 260 also holds the distinction of being the basis for one of GM's more controversial experiments, the 350 diesel V8. The diesel version shared the 260's general layout and block design, although the diesel's poor reliability unfairly affected perceptions of the entire engine family. In truth, the gasoline-powered 260 was a solid, low-stress engine that delivered what it promised: smooth cruising, decent economy, and minimal fuss. Though it quietly disappeared from the lineup after 1982, the Olds 260 deserves recognition as a practical solution to a difficult era. It wasn't designed to thrill, but it kept the V8 alive when smaller, more economical options were taking over. And in that sense, it played a crucial role in the evolution of the American V8. Number 6. Ford 255 cubic inch, 4.2-liter, V8, 1980 to 1982. The Ford 255 cubic inch V8, introduced in 1980, represents one of the smallest displacement V8 engines ever produced by Ford for passenger cars. At just 4.2 liters, the 255 was created as a direct response to rising fuel economy standards and tightening emissions regulations in the early 1980s. It was developed as a downsized version of the popular 302 Windsor engine, sharing the same stroke but using a smaller 3.6 8-inch bore. The 255 was aimed at buyers who still wanted the perceived refinement and status of a V8 engine but were no longer willing or able to pay the penalty in fuel economy. It was primarily installed in vehicles like the Ford Mustang, Thunderbird, Fairmont, and Mercury Capri, acting as the base V8 option. Despite the badge appeal of a V8, performance was modest at best. Most versions made around 115 horsepower and 190 pound-feet of torque, which meant acceleration was underwhelming, even by early 1980 standards. The engine used a two-barrel carburetor and very mild camshaft timing, which helped meet emissions requirements but further limited performance. It retained the Windsor family's compatibility with existing components, making it easy to manufacture and service. However, its limited power and unremarkable driving characteristics meant it was largely ignored by enthusiasts and quickly gained a reputation as one of the least exciting V8s Ford ever produced. The 255 was quietly phased out after just 3 years, with the more capable 302 reclaiming its spot as Ford's small-block V8 of choice. While the 255 didn't leave a lasting mark in terms of performance, it remains an important footnote in Ford's history. It symbolizes a time when automakers were forced to compromise, shrinking engines, sacrificing power, and doing whatever they could to survive in a dramatically changing landscape. Number 5. Ford 255 cubic inch, 4.2-liter, V8, alternate trim, 1980 to 1982. The alternate trim versions of Ford's 255 cubic inch V8 didn't differ mechanically from the base model, but they were tailored for specific vehicle applications and trim levels within Ford and Mercury's early 1980s lineup. While the core design remained the same, a D-board 302 Windsor with a smaller 3.6 8-inch bore, the alternate trims were aimed at providing just enough V8 refinement to mid-range buyers without the fuel penalties of larger engines. These versions were often used in more upscale models like the Mercury Cougar, Ford LTD, and certain mid-trim Thunderbirds, where marketing still prioritized the V8 badge even if performance was no longer the focus. Despite carrying the legacy of Ford's legendary small-block lineage, the 255 was a shadow of its predecessors in terms of power. Most alternate trim versions were rated at around 115 horsepower and 190 pound-feet of torque, and some were further detuned depending on emissions calibrations for specific states like California. A two-barrel motorcraft carburetor and extremely conservative ignition timing were used to optimize emissions compliance, but the result was sluggish throttle response and uninspiring acceleration. In these alternate trim applications, the 255 V8 was more about perception than performance. Customers who still equated V8s with prestige and smoothness were more likely to choose it over a six-cylinder, even if the real-world driving experience wasn't significantly better. The engine's compactness and parts interchangeability did make it easy to service and affordable to maintain, which contributed to its short-lived popularity. Ultimately, these alternate trim 255s were quietly retired by 1982, making way once again for more capable engines, like the 302, which returned in improved emissions-compliant forms. While largely forgotten today, the 255 V8 in all its trims reflects a moment when downsizing collided with tradition, and the American V8, even at its smallest, refused to disappear. Number 4. Ford 221 cubic inch, 3.6-liter, V8, 1962 to 1963. The Ford 221 cubic inch V8, introduced in 1962, holds the distinction of being the very first engine in Ford's now iconic small-block V8 family. At just 3.6 liters in displacement, it was also one of the smallest V8s ever produced by Ford for mass-market vehicles. Created to power the new mid-size Fairlane and compete with GM's smaller displacement engines, the 221 was a departure from the bulkier, heavier V8s of the 1950s. It featured a 3.5-inch bore and 2.87-inch stroke, and produced 145 horsepower with a two-barrel carburetor, respectable output for such a small engine at the time. What made the 221 notable wasn't just its size, but its lightweight, compact design that introduced key architecture and engineering cues that would later carry through to the legendary 260, 289, and 302 Windsor engines. It featured thin-wall casting techniques that allowed it to weigh significantly less than its predecessors, making it ideal for the growing segment of intermediate and compact vehicles. Although its production run was short, lasting just 2 model years, the 221 laid the foundation for Ford's performance revolution in the 1960s. It was never a powerhouse, but it proved that a small V8 could deliver smooth performance and fit easily into smaller engine bays, without compromising balance or fuel efficiency. It also featured innovations such as hydraulic lifters and 5 main bearings, which improved durability and engine smoothness. In retrospect, the 221 was a transitional engine, an evolutionary step that led to bigger, better-known versions of the Windsor small block. But on this list, it earns a special place as the pioneering spirit of Ford's compact V8 movement. Even though its time was brief, its legacy was monumental, planting the seeds for a family of engines that would go on to dominate muscle cars, pony cars, and pickup trucks for decades. Number 3. Buick, Oldsmobile, Pontiac 215 cubic inch, 3.5-liter, V8, 1961 to 1963. The 215 cubic inch aluminum V8, shared by Buick, Oldsmobile, and briefly Pontiac, stands as one of the most innovative and historically significant small V8 engines ever produced in America. Introduced in 1961, this 3.5-liter engine was a bold departure from the heavy iron block V8s of the 1950s. Its all-aluminum construction made it extremely lightweight, just around 320 pounds, allowing it to deliver strong performance without compromising fuel economy or balance. In Buick form, the 215 used a unique aluminum block with cast-iron liners and was paired with a 2- or 4-barrel carburetor producing between 155 and 200 horsepower. The Oldsmobile variant featured slightly different cylinder heads and even an advanced turbocharged version, the Jetfire Turbo Rocket, which made it the world's first turbocharged production car engine. Pontiac used the engine only briefly, primarily for its Tempest models, before moving on to different platforms. Though it offered excellent power-to-weight ratio and helped bring V8 refinement to compact cars like the Buick Special and Olds F85, The engine's high manufacturing costs and some early durability issues led GM to cancel it after just a few years. But the story of the 215 didn't end there. The rights and tooling were sold to the British automaker Rover, which went on to refine and produce the engine for over 3 decades. It powered everything from Range Rovers to MG sports cars to TVRs and became a staple of British performance engineering. The 215 may not have lasted long under the GM banner, but its influence was far-reaching. As one of the lightest and most versatile V8s of its era, it remains a testament to the potential of innovation in a time of conservatism. Few engines of its size had such a global impact. Number 2. Ford 260 cubic inch, 4.3-liter, V8, Fairlane, Falcon variant, 1962 to 1964. The Ford 260 cubic inch V8, as used in the early Fairlane and Falcon models, was a crucial building block in Ford's transition toward compact performance and efficiency in the early 1960s. While the 260 would later gain fame under the hood of the Shelby Cobra, its origins were much more modest. Designed as a slightly larger version of Ford's new 221 small block V8, the 260 was engineered to deliver smooth V8 refinement in lightweight mid-size platforms. With a bore and stroke of 3.8 by 2.87 inches, the 260 offered a respectable 164 horsepower and 258 pound-feet of torque with a 2-barrel carburetor. These figures may not seem groundbreaking today, but at the time, they represented a sweet spot between fuel economy and everyday drivability. The engine was compact, relatively lightweight, and ideally suited for the smaller engine bays of the Falcon and the newly launched Fairlane, which straddled the line between compact and full-size car segments. One of the 260's biggest advantages was its smoothness and quiet operation, traits that Ford heavily promoted in its marketing during an era when refinement was becoming just as important as raw power. Buyers appreciated having the option of a V8 that didn't necessarily come with high fuel costs or harsh noise, and the 260 filled that niche perfectly. It was also durable and easy to work on, benefiting from the Windsor family's straightforward design. Though the engine was eventually phased out in favor of the higher-performing 289, the 260 in Fairlanes and Falcons laid the groundwork for what would become Ford's reputation for accessible V8 performance. On this list of the smallest V8s, it stands not only for its compact size, but for its role in bringing V8 power to the masses in a changing automotive world. Number 1. Ford 260 cubic inch, 4.3-liter, V8, early Mustang, Shelby Cobra application. The Ford 260 cubic inch V8's most iconic chapter came when it powered two of the most legendary cars in American automotive history, the early Ford Mustang and the very first Shelby Cobra. Although the 260 had already proven itself as a capable and reliable power plant in the Falcon and Fairlane, its inclusion in these groundbreaking vehicles elevated its legacy far beyond its modest displacement. When the Mustang launched in mid-1964, the 260 served as the standard V8 option for the earliest models. Its 164 horsepower and 258 pound-feet of torque gave the Mustang a level of smooth, eager performance that perfectly matched its stylish, affordable persona. It was a car that could turn heads and still fit in a college parking lot or suburban driveway, and the 260's lightweight construction helped ensure excellent handling for its time. However, the 260 gained even greater fame under the hood of the first production Shelby Cobras in 1962 and 1963. Carroll Shelby chose the 260 not because it was Ford's most powerful engine, but because it was the right size to fit in the tight engine bay of the British AC Ace chassis. The resulting car, the Shelby Cobra 260, was light, brutally fast for its size, and incredibly agile. It became the foundation for the Cobra legend, even though it would later be replaced by more powerful 289 and 427 variants. In both the Mustang and the Cobra, the 260 represented a fusion of approachability and performance. It showed that a small V8 didn't have to be a compromise. It could instead be a catalyst for automotive revolutions. As the smallest V8 on this list, the Ford 260 stands not just for its size, but for the massive legacy it left in its wake. Its compact power helped launch icons, and in doing so, cemented its place in history. In history.